Captain Jake Morrison had seen his share of impossible things during his 15 years aboard interstellar vessels, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Standing in the pristine white corridors of the Zephyrian diplomatic ship Starweaver, he found himself face-to-face with Princess Lyralii of the third constellation, and she was absolutely furious. "You dare mock our sacred greeting protocols?" Her voice carried the musical quality that all Zephyrians possessed, but it was sharp with indignation. Her translucent blue skin seemed to shimmer with barely contained emotion, and the delicate crystal formations that served as her hair chimed softly with each angry gesture. Jake held up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The diplomatic mission to establish trade relations with the Zephyrian Empire had been going smoothly until this moment. His crew had followed every protocol, memorized every cultural nuance, and yet somehow he had managed to offend royalty within minutes of boarding their ship. "Your Highness, I assure you, no disrespect was intended," Jake said carefully, trying to remember the formal speech patterns a xenolinguist had drilled into him. "Perhaps there was a translation error?" Princess Lyralii's large, opalescent eyes narrowed. "Translation error?" You looked directly at me and said, "Hey, sweetheart," in perfect Zephyrian formal dialect. "Do you take me for a fool?" Jake's mind raced. He had indeed greeted her, but he had used what his linguistic database assured him was the proper formal greeting for Zephyrian nobility. "Hey, sweetheart," couldn't possibly be the translation, could it? Behind the princess, her retinue of advisors and guards watched the exchange with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The lead advisor, an elderly Zephyrian with silver-tinted skin, stepped forward. "Princess, perhaps we should consider that human linguistic databases may be inadequate," the advisor suggested diplomatically. "Their species is still quite young in terms of galactic civilization." "Young or not, Ambassador Thane, they should have verified their translations with our embassy before attempting formal contact," the princess replied, though Jake noticed some of the heat had left her voice. Jake felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. The mission that Earth's diplomatic corps had spent 3 years preparing for was falling apart in the first 5 minutes. The Zephyrian Empire controlled some of the most valuable trade routes in this sector of the galaxy, and establishing relations with them could mean the difference between humanity thriving among the stars or remaining an isolated backwater species. "Your Highness," Jake began, abandoning the formal protocols entirely. "I'll be completely honest with you. My species is new to interstellar diplomacy. We're probably going to make mistakes, and apparently we've already made a significant one. But we came here in good faith, hoping to learn from civilizations like yours. If I've offended you, it wasn't intentional, and I sincerely apologize." The princess studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The crystal formations in her hair had stopped chiming, which Jake hoped was a good sign. Around them, the ship's corridors hummed with barely audible harmonics that seemed to respond to the emotional state of its Zephyrian passengers. "You speak more honestly now than your prepared speeches," she observed, "though your linguistic database remains troublesome. What you said translates roughly to the most intimate greeting possible between Zephyrian mates." Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment. "I am so sorry. I had no idea." Clearly, the princess glanced at her advisors, then back at Jake. "However, your honesty is refreshing. Most species that approach us come with layers of deception and hidden agendas. Tell me, Captain Morrison, why should the Zephyrian Empire care about establishing relations with humanity?" This was the question Jake had prepared for, but not under these circumstances. Standing in a corridor with offended alien royalty, he realized that all his carefully rehearsed speeches seemed inadequate. Instead, he decided to continue with the honesty that had seemed to intrigue her. "Because we're different," he said simply. "Every species we've encountered so far has been older, more advanced, more sophisticated than us. We don't have technology that will amaze you or wisdom that will enlighten you. But we have something else, which is, we adapt. Humans have this stubborn refusal to accept that something can't be done. Put us in an environment that should kill us, and we'll figure out how to not only survive, but thrive. Give us a problem that seems impossible, and we'll keep throwing solutions at it until something works. We're not the smartest species in the galaxy, but we might be the most persistent." Princess Lyralii tilted her head, a gesture that reminded Jake of a curious bird. "Persistence is not necessarily a virtue, Captain. Your species has a reputation for being aggressive. Aggressive, yes. Violent when necessary, absolutely. But that's not all we are. Jake paused, trying to find the right words. 300 years ago, my people were confined to a single planet, fighting amongst ourselves over resources. Today, we have colonies on dozens of worlds and have learned to work together as a species. We've made mistakes, but we've learned from them. And what makes you think the galaxy needs human persistence? Jake smiled wryly. Because for what I've seen so far, most galactic civilizations have become so advanced that they've forgotten how to solve problems that don't have elegant solutions. Sometimes the best answer isn't the most sophisticated one. Sometimes you need someone willing to try the obvious approach that everyone else has dismissed as too crude or simple. The princess was quiet for several minutes, her opalescent eyes studying Jake's face. Her advisors exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Finally, she spoke. You intrigue me, Captain Morrison. Your species' diplomatic protocols may be lacking, but your perspective is unusual. I will grant you, and your delegation guest quarters aboard the Starweaver for 3 cycles. During that time, you'll have the opportunity to demonstrate this human persistence you speak of. Relief flooded through Jake. Thank you, Your Highness. We won't waste the opportunity. See that you don't. The princess turned to leave, then paused. And Captain, next time you greet a Zephyrian royal, the proper phrase is honor to your constellation. What you said today, let's just say it was fortunate I found your ignorance more amusing than insulting. As she glided away with her entourage, Jake slumped against the corridor wall. His first officer, Commander Sarah Chun, approached from where she had been waiting with the rest of the human delegation. Well, that went better than I expected, she said dryly. Better? Jake stared at her. I accidentally propositioned alien royalty within minutes of meeting her. Yes, but she didn't have you executed or expelled from her ship. In fact, I'd say she seemed almost interested in your unconventional approach. Jake shook his head. Let's just focus on not making any more cultural blunders for the next 3 days. We need to prove that humanity deserves a place in galactic civilization. No pressure then, Chen muttered. The guest quarters they were assigned were luxurious by human standards, with walls that shifted color based on occupant preference, and furniture that adjusted automatically for human physiology. Jake found himself alone in his assigned room, reviewing everything he knew about Zephyrian culture and trying to figure out how to salvage the mission. The Zephyrians were an ancient race, one of the founding members of the Galactic Trade Consortium. They valued harmony, wisdom, and cultural refinement above all else. Their ships were works of art as much as vehicles. Their cities were perfectly planned symphonies of architecture and nature, and their society had achieved a level of peaceful prosperity that most species could only dream of. Humans, by contrast, were the galactic equivalent of barbarians who had just learned to use fire. They had achieved faster-than-light travel through brute force engineering rather than elegant physics. Their colonies were functional, but hardly beautiful, and their society was still working through the growing pains of becoming a truly unified species. But Jake admit what he said about human persistence. Throughout history, when faced with seemingly impossible challenges, humans have found ways to overcome them. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and environmental disasters. They had gone from primitive hunter-gatherers to interstellar travelers in a remarkably short time span, not because they were the most intelligent species on their planet, but because they refused to accept limitations. A soft chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he found Princess Lyralii standing in the corridor, now dressed in simpler robes that seemed to flow like liquid starlight. Your Highness, Jake said, quickly straightening. Is everything all right? I've come to invite you to dine with me, she said. Privately, I find myself curious about your species, and formal diplomatic dinners rarely provide opportunities for genuine conversation. Jake hesitated. Dining alone with alien royalty seemed like another opportunity for cultural disaster. I'm honored by the invitation, but I should probably warn you that human dining customs might be primitive, crude, lacking in sophistication. The princess smiled, and Jake was surprised to see what looked like genuine amusement in her eyes. Captain, after the greeting incident, I think we've established that cultural perfection is not to be expected. I'm more interested in authenticity. In that case, I accept. Though I should warn you that human conversation over meals tends to be informal. Good. I have spent centuries attending formal dinners where every word is carefully measured and every gesture perfectly choreographed. The prospect of an unpredictable conversation is refreshing. The princess's private dining chamber was smaller than Jake had expected, with walls that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight and a table that hovered weightlessly in the center of the room. The Zephyrian approach to cuisine was as artistic as everything else in their culture, with dishes that were as much visual and auditory experiences as they were culinary ones. "This is beautiful," Jake said genuinely as he took in the room. "Though I have to admit, I'm not sure about the proper etiquette for floating furniture. Just sit," Princess Lyralii said with what Jake was learning to recognize as her version of laughter. "The chair will adjust to support you properly." As they ate, the conversation flowed more naturally than Jake had expected. The princess asked questions about human culture, history, and customs with what seemed like genuine curiosity. In return, Jake found himself learning about Zephyrian society from a perspective he never could have gained from diplomatic briefings. "Your species fascinates me," the princess said as they finished what Jake assumed was dessert, though it had tasted like crystallized music. "Most civilizations we encounter have followed similar paths to advancement. They develop philosophy, then science, then technology, then space travel. Each step builds logically on the last. But humans seem to have developed everything simultaneously, often in contradiction to each other." "We're not very logical," Jake admitted. "We tend to figure things out as we go along." "Yes, but that's what makes you interesting. Do you know what the greatest threat to galactic civilization is, Captain?" Jake shook his head. "Stagnation. Most species, once they achieve a certain level of technological and social advancement, stop growing. They become comfortable, complacent. They maintain their status quo because change involves risk, and risk threatens stability. And you think humans might be different? I think humans haven't had time to become complacent. Your species is still growing, still changing, still willing to take risks that more established civilizations would consider foolish." Jay considered this. "Is that why you're really considering trade relations with us? Not because we have anything valuable to offer now, but because we might offer something valuable in the future." The princess smiled, and Jake realized it was the first completely genuine expression he had seen from her. "Perhaps you understand more about diplomacy than your linguistic database suggested. Or maybe I just understand survival. When you're the new species on the block, you learn to read between the lines pretty quickly." They talked late into the ship's night cycle, and Jake found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. The princess was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny when she let her formal guard down. More importantly, she seemed to genuinely understand what humanity could bring to galactic civilization. As the evening ended, and Jake prepared to return to his quarters, Princess Lyralii said something that surprised him. "Captain, I want you to know that regardless of how the formal negotiations proceed, I believe your species has a place among the stars. The galaxy needs the kind of energy and adaptability that humans represent." "Thank you, Your Highness. That means more than you know." "Lyralii," she said quietly. "When we're speaking privately, you may call me Lyralii." Jake felt honored by the gesture. "Thank you, Lyralii. And please call me Jake." As he walked back to his quarters, Jake reflected on the unexpected turn the day had taken. What had started as a diplomatic disaster was beginning to feel like the foundation of something important. Not just trade relations, but genuine understanding between species. He had no way of knowing that this conversation would be remembered as the moment when humanity truly began its integration into galactic civilization. Nor could he have predicted that the curious, intelligent woman he had dined with would become one of humanity's most important allies in the challenges that lay ahead. All he knew was that for the first time since arriving in Zephyrian space, he felt optimistic about humanity's future among the stars. The second day aboard the Starweaver brought Jake face-to-face with the formal diplomatic process, and it was every bit as challenging as he had feared. The main conference chamber was a masterpiece of Zephyrian architecture, with walls that seemed to extend infinitely upward and acoustic properties that made every whisper audible throughout the vast space. Jake sat at the human delegation's assigned position, flanked by Commander Chun, Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Xenobiology team, and trade specialist Marcus Webb. Across the crystalline conference table, Princess Lyralii presided over a collection of Zephyrian officials whose titles Jake could barely pronounce, let alone remember. The morning had been devoted to formal presentations. The Zephyrians had outlined their trade networks, technological capabilities, and cultural achievements with the kind of precision that spoke of thousands of years of refined civilization. When it came time for the human presentation, Jake had abandoned his prepared speech in favor of a more honest assessment of humanity's capabilities. "We know we're the newcomers here," Jake had begun. "We don't have the technological sophistication of the Zephyrian Empire or the cultural refinement that comes with millennia of civilization. What we do have is adaptability, innovation born of necessity, and a willingness to tackle problems that others might consider too difficult or too dangerous." The Zephyrian officials had listened politely, but Jake could see the skepticism in their expressions. Advanced civilizations had little use for primitive persistence when elegant solutions already existed for most problems. It was Ambassador Thane who finally voiced what many of them were thinking. "Captain Morrison, your enthusiasm is admirable, but the Galactic Trade Consortium requires partners who can contribute meaningful value to established networks. What specific technologies or resources does humanity offer that the galaxy lacks?" Jake had been dreading this question because the honest answer was not much. Human technology was functional but crude by galactic standards. Their resource base was limited to a handful of colonial worlds. Their scientific achievements, while impressive by human standards, were elementary compared to species that had been advancing for thousands of years. Before Jake could formulate a response, Dr. Vasquez spoke up. "If I may, Ambassador, I think you're asking the wrong question. Instead of asking what technologies we have now, perhaps you should ask what problems we've solved that others couldn't." The Zephyrian delegation exchanged glances. Princess Lyralii leaned forward slightly, her expression interested. "Elaborate, Dr. Vasquez." Elena stood, activating a holographic display that showed a barren, lifeless world. "This is Kepler, 442c, one of humanity's newest colonies. When we first surveyed it 5 years ago, every computer model said it was uninhabitable. The atmosphere was toxic, the soil was contaminated with heavy metals, and the climate was unstable. Every other species we consulted told us to write it off as a loss." The hologram shifted to show the same world, now covered with green vegetation and dotted with human settlements. "Today, Kepler, 442c supports a population of 50,000 humans and produces enough food to export to 3 other worlds. We didn't terraform it using advanced technology. We used adapted Earth bacteria, modified crop strains, and a lot of trial and error." "Impressive," Ambassador Thane admitted. "But surely such techniques could be replicated by more advanced species if they chose to invest the time and resources." "That's exactly the point," Jake interjected. "More advanced species don't choose to invest that time and resources because it's not elegant. It's messy, difficult, and there's no guarantee of success. But sometimes messy solutions are the only ones that work." Trade Specialist Webb activated another display, this one showing shipping routes. "The Nexus Nebula has been considered impassable for 3 centuries because of its unpredictable gravimetric distortions. Last month, a human cargo ship successfully navigated through it using a combination of intuitive piloting and modified sensor arrays, cutting the shipping time between the outer rim and core worlds by 40%. The room fell silent. The Nexus Nebula route had been a theoretical possibility that every major civilization had studied and abandoned as too dangerous and unpredictable for practical use. Princess Lyralii spoke carefully. "You're suggesting that humanity's value lies not in technological advancement, but in your willingness to attempt solutions that others have deemed impossible." "Not impossible," Commander Chin corrected. "Impractical. There's a difference. Most galactic civilizations have reached a point where they only pursue solutions that meet certain criteria for elegance, efficiency, and predictability. Humans haven't reached that point yet. We're still willing to try approaches that might fail spectacularly." "And why is this valuable?" asked Counselor Viridian, an ancient Zephyrian whose skin had the deep blue coloration that indicated extreme age and wisdom among her people. Jake thought carefully before answering. "Because the galaxy is facing new challenges that don't have elegant solutions. The void plague on the outer rim worlds, the destabilization of the Andorian trade routes, the increasing aggression of the hegemony forces. These aren't problems that can be solved with refined technology and careful planning. They're the kind of problems that require someone willing to take risks and try unconventional approaches. The Void Plague was a particularly sensitive subject. The mysterious disease had been spreading through Outer Rim colonies for 2 years, defying every attempt at treatment or containment by the galaxy's most advanced medical experts. Entire worlds had been quarantined, and some had already been written off as lost causes. You believe humanity could address the Void Plague where others have failed? Princess Lyraliai's voice was carefully neutral, but Jake could sense the importance of his answer. I believe humanity would approach it differently, Jake said honestly. We wouldn't start by trying to understand every aspect of the plague's biology and develop a perfect cure. We'd start by trying everything we could think of to keep people alive, even if we didn't understand why it worked. Dr. Vasquez nodded. Human medical history is full of treatments that worked long before we understood the underlying science. Sometimes the desperate solution becomes the foundation for the elegant one. The Zephyrian officials spent several minutes in whispered conference, their crystalline hair creating a soft musical backdrop to their discussions. Finally, Counselor Viridian spoke. Your arguments are intriguing. However, the Galactic Trade Consortium requires more than theoretical value. If humanity wishes to establish formal trade relations, you must demonstrate practical results. Jake felt his stomach sink. What kind of demonstration? Princess Lyraliai answered. The mining station on Zirian Prime has been offline for 6 months due to equipment failures in the hazardous environment. 3 different engineering teams from advanced civilizations have attempted repairs, but the combination of radiation, corrosive atmosphere, and seismic instability has made conventional solutions impossible. The station is considered a total loss. You want us to try to repair it, Jake said, understanding. If you can restore the Zirian Prime facility to operational status, the Zephyrian Empire will sponsor humanity's application for membership in the Galactic Trade Consortium, Ambassador Thane confirmed. If you fail, we will recommend that humanity spend another century developing your capabilities before attempting galactic integration. The weight of the challenge settled on Jake's shoulders. Zirian Prime was a notorious disaster in galactic engineering circles. The mining station had been built to extract rare elements from a world that existed in a constant state of barely controlled geological catastrophe. When the automated systems had finally failed, the world had been written off as too dangerous for any cost-effective repair mission. How long do we have? Commander Chen asked. 2 standard weeks, Princess Lyraliai replied. Long enough to reach Zirian Prime and attempt your repairs, but not so long that prolonged failure becomes an embarrassment to the Empire. Jake looked at his team. Dr. Vasquez was already pulling up technical specifications on her portable display. Webb was calculating logistics and supply requirements. Chen was reviewing the previous failed repair attempts, looking for patterns in the failures. We'll need complete technical specifications for the facility, environmental data, and access to the previous engineering reports, Jake said. Granted, Princess Lyraliai said immediately. You'll also have access to a Zephyrian technical team to provide support and witness your attempts. And if we succeed? Jake asked. Then, humanity will have proven that your unconventional approach has practical value, the princess replied. The Trade Consortium will gain a new member species, and the galaxy will gain access to human innovation. And if we fail? Princess Lyraliai's expression was unreadable. Then, humanity will have gained valuable experience in galactic-scale engineering, and perhaps a better understanding of why some problems remain unsolved. The meeting adjourned with formal protocols that Jake barely registered. His mind was already racing ahead to the challenge that lay before them. Zirian Prime represented everything that made human space exploration dangerous. An environment that tried to kill you in multiple ways simultaneously, equipment pushed beyond its design limits, and the kind of problem that required improvisation rather than careful planning. In other words, exactly the kind of challenge that humans have been dealing with since they first left Earth. That evening, Jake found himself once again dining with Princess Lyraliai, though this time the conversation was focused on the technical aspects of a Zirian Prime mission. She had provided detailed reports from the previous repair attempts, and Jake was struck by how methodical and careful each approach had been. Every team tried to solve the fundamental problems first, Jake observed, scrolling through the engineering reports on a crystal data tablet. They wanted to stabilize the seismic activity, neutralize the atmospheric corrosion, and shield against radiation before attempting any repairs. A logical approach, Lyrelii noted. Address the causes rather than the symptoms. Logical, yes, but also impossible. You can't stabilize the geology of an entire planet, and you can't neutralize an atmosphere without terraforming equipment that would cost more than 1,000 mining stations. Then, how would you approach it? Jake smiled. By accepting that the environment is going to try to kill us and planning accordingly. Instead of trying to make Xerion Prime safe, we make our repair mission fast enough and resilient enough to work in an unsafe environment. That sounds extremely dangerous. Absolutely. But sometimes dangerous solutions are the only ones that work. Lyrelii was quiet for several minutes, studying Jake with those opalescent eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. You're not just talking about engineering, are you? You're talking about a fundamental philosophical difference in how humans approach problems. Maybe. Most galactic civilizations seem to believe that sufficient planning and technology can eliminate risk. Humans have learned to accept that some risks can't be eliminated, only managed. And you think this makes humanity valuable to galactic civilization? Jake set down his eating utensil and met her gaze directly. I think the galaxy has become very good at solving predictable problems and very bad at handling unpredictable ones. The Void Plague, the Andorian Crisis, the hegemony expansion. These aren't problems that can be solved with perfect planning and advanced technology. They're chaos, and chaos requires a different kind of response. Chaos also requires courage, Lyrelii said quietly. The kind of courage that comes from having nothing to lose. Humanity has plenty to lose now, Jake corrected. We have colonies, a growing population, a future among the stars. But we haven't forgotten what it's like to have everything at risk. And that's what you're offering the galaxy. The memory of desperation. The willingness to act when elegant solutions aren't available, Jake clarified. Sometimes the galaxy is going to need someone willing to try the desperate solution. As the evening progressed, Jake found himself increasingly aware that his conversations with Princess Lyrelii had moved beyond mere diplomacy. There was a personal connection developing, an intellectual intimacy that transcended species boundaries. When she laughed at his descriptions of human engineering philosophy, or when she challenged his assumptions about galactic civilization, he felt a spark of something that had nothing to do with trade negotiations. Jake, she said as the evening wound down, using his first name with an ease that still surprised him. I want you to know that regardless of what happens at Xerion Prime, I believe in what humanity represents. The galaxy needs the kind of energy and innovation that your species brings. Even if we fail spectacularly, especially if you fail spectacularly. Sometimes the attempt is more important than the success. Jake felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the ship. Thank you, Lyrelii. That means more than you know. As he prepared to leave, she placed a hand on his arm. The gesture was brief, barely a second, but Jake felt a subtle electrical sensation where her skin touched his. When he looked at her in surprise, he saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. Good luck tomorrow, she said softly. I'll be watching with great interest. Walking back to his quarters, Jake realized that the mission to Xerion Prime had become about more than just proving humanity's worth to galactic civilization. It had become about proving himself worthy of the trust and growing affection of an alien princess who had begun to mean far more to him than diplomatic protocol should allow. The next morning, as the human team prepared to transfer to a smaller, more maneuverable ship for the journey to Xerion Prime, Jake caught himself wondering if this was how interspecies relationships began, with impossible challenges, cultural misunderstandings, and the gradual recognition that intelligence and courage transcended the boundaries of biology. Xerion Prime was everything the reports had promised, and worse. As the human repair ship Persistence entered the planet's atmosphere, Jake watched through the viewport as the surface revealed itself in all its hostile glory. The world looked like it was perpetually dying. Massive geological fractures split the continents, atmospheric storms raged with supernatural fury, and the aurora-like radiation displays painted the sky in colors that no human eye was meant to see. Atmospheric composition is even worse than the reports indicated, Dr. Vasquez called out from her station. The corrosive compounds have increased by 15% since the last survey. Commander Chun was monitoring the seismic readings. We're looking at constant microtremors with major seismic events every 4 to 6 hours. The next predicted major quake is in 3 hours and 27 minutes. Trade specialist Webb, who had proven surprisingly useful as a technical coordinator, was reviewing the mining station schematics. The facility is built into the cliff face of the Valdres Canyon, approximately 2 kilometers down from the surface. Emergency access tunnel shows signs of structural compromise. Jake studied the tactical display showing their target. The Zirian Prime mining facility had been an engineering marvel when it was constructed, a fully automated operation capable of extracting rare crystalline compounds from one of the most geologically unstable worlds in known space. The previous repair teams had all tried to approach the problem systematically, addressing the environmental challenges before attempting repairs to the delicate mining equipment. "What's our approach, Captain?" Chen asked. Jake had spent the 3-day journey to Zirian Prime developing what he privately called the human solution to the problem. Instead of trying to make the environment safe for repairs, they would make the repairs resilient enough to survive the environment. "We go fast, we go dirty, and we go with the assumption that everything will go wrong," Jake announced. "Dr. Vasquez, I need you to identify which systems are absolutely critical for basic operation. We're not trying to restore the facility to full capacity. We just need to prove it can function." "That's actually quite sensible," said a new voice from behind them. Jake turned to see Engineer Therian, the Zephyrian technical advisor who had been assigned to observe their mission. Her crystalline hair was a pale green color that indicated youth among her people, and her expression suggested she found human methodology both fascinating and slightly insane. "You approve?" Jake asked, surprised. "I find your approach refreshingly direct. The previous teams spent weeks trying to solve problems that may not have solutions. You're focusing on what can actually be accomplished." Engineer Therian had proven to be an unexpectedly valuable team member during the journey. Unlike the formal diplomatic advisors Jake had dealt with previously, she seemed genuinely curious about human engineering methods rather than dismissive of them. She had also provided technical insights that had helped refine their repair strategy. "The main mining array has 17 critical subsystems," Dr. Vasquez reported. "But according to the original specifications, the facility was designed to operate at 60% efficiency with only 9 of those systems functional. Then we focus on those 9 systems and ignore everything else," Jake decided. "Webb, how long can we realistically work in that environment before the radiation exposure becomes lethal? With our protective suits and medical countermeasures, we have approximately 6 hours before we start risking permanent damage. 8 hours maximum before emergency evacuation becomes necessary. And the seismic activity will give us windows of relative stability lasting approximately 90 minutes between major events," Chen added. Jake felt the familiar sensation of a plan crystallizing in his mind. It wasn't elegant, wasn't safe, and it definitely wasn't the kind of approach that would be approved by any civilized engineering review board. But it might actually work. "Here's what we're going to do," Jake announced. "We're going to attempt repairs in 3 2-hour windows, working around the seismic events. Each team will focus on specific systems with prefabricated repair modules. When a seismic event hits, we evacuate to safe positions and wait it out. When the environment calms down, we go back in and continue where we left off." Engineer Therian was studying the plan on her display. "This approach leaves no margin for error. If any part of the repair sequence fails, you won't have time to troubleshoot." "That's why we're not going to troubleshoot," Jake replied. "We're going to use the human approach. Prepare multiple solutions for every problem, and switch between them until something works." "That seems chaotic." Commander Chen grinned. "Welcome to human engineering, Engineer Therian. We don't make it elegant, but we make it work." The descent to the mining facility was a white-knuckle experience that tested both human engineering and Zephyrian technology. The Persistence had been modified with additional shielding and stabilization systems, but even so, the combination of atmospheric turbulence, radiation interference, and seismic activity made the landing approach feel like controlled falling. "Landing pad is intact, but showing stress fractures," Chen reported as they approached the facility. "Recommend minimal ground time." The Zirian Prime mining station was a testament to the ambition of galactic engineering, a massive complex carved directly into the canyon wall, with extraction equipment that extended deep into the planet's unstable crust. Most of the structure appeared intact, but Jake could see the telltale signs of system failure throughout the facility. Environmental suits, everyone, Jake ordered as they prepared to disembark. Remember, we're not tourists. Get in, fix what can be fixed, and get out before this place kills us. The surface of Zirian Prime felt like walking through a nightmare. The ground vibrated constantly with minor tremors. The air shimmered with radiation distortions, and the sound of geological stress echoed from the canyon walls like the planet's death rattle. Jake's environmental suit registered dozens of hazards within the first few minutes of EVA. First target is the primary power distribution node, Dr. Vasquez announced over the comm system. Located in Section C, Level 3. Estimated repair time, 45 minutes, if we don't encounter complications. When have we ever not encountered complications? Webb muttered, but he was already moving toward the facility's emergency access tunnel with a pack full of replacement components. The interior of the mining station was a maze of functional architecture designed for automated operation rather than human comfort. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, and the constant vibration from seismic activity made every step feel uncertain. Power grid shows massive cascade failures, Chen reported from her diagnostic station. The good news is that most of the damage appears to be from overload protection rather than actual system destruction. The bad news is that the overload protection systems are also damaged. Jake was beginning to understand why the previous repair teams had been defeated by Zirian Prime. The facility hadn't been destroyed by any single catastrophic failure. It had been slowly degraded by the constant stress of operating in an impossible environment. Every system was damaged, every backup was compromised, and every repair attempt had to be made while the environment continued to attack the facility. Contact, Dr. Vasquez called out over the comm. I got the power distribution node accessible. Beginning repairs now. Jake watched through his helmet display as Elena worked with the focused intensity that he had come to associate with human engineers under pressure. She wasn't trying to understand why the system had failed or develop an elegant solution for preventing future failures. She was simply replacing damaged components as quickly as possible and rerouting power around the irreparable sections. Therian, are you getting this? Jake asked the Zephyrian engineer. Yes, and I must admit, Dr. Vasquez's approach is remarkably effective. She's bypassed 17 different safety protocols and created what my technical training would classify as a dangerous jury-rigged system. It should not work according to any engineering standard I've been taught. But is it working? Astonishingly, yes. Power levels are climbing steadily. Jake felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly what he had hoped to demonstrate. The human willingness to abandon elegant solutions in favor of practical ones could sometimes achieve results that conventional approaches couldn't match. Seismic event in 15 minutes, Commander Chun announced. All teams need to reach safe positions. The next hour followed the same pattern. Rapid repairs during periods of relative stability, followed by tense evacuations to reinforce sections during seismic events. Jake watched his team work with the kind of focused efficiency that came from knowing that every minute counted. Engineer Therian proved to be an invaluable team member, providing technical expertise about Zephyrian systems while adapting to human repair methodologies with surprising ease. Jake found himself impressed by her willingness to abandon formal protocols when practical results required improvisation. The mining array power coupling is accessible, she reported during the second work period. However, the replacement parts we brought are not compatible with the damaged connection systems. Can you modify them? Jake asked, not using conventional techniques. The specifications are too different. Webb looked up from his own workstation. What about unconventional techniques? Therian was quiet for several seconds. There's a possibility. If we use the emergency welding system to create a custom adapter, and then modify the power regulation protocols to compensate for the non-standard connection, it would violate approximately 12 different safety standards. Will it work? Jake asked. It should, for a while. Perhaps long enough to demonstrate operational capacity. Then do it. Jake realized that what they were creating wasn't really a repair. It was an elaborate proof of concept that the facility could be made functional, even if the methods required to achieve functionality would horrify any respectable engineering review board. But sometimes proof of concept was enough. The third work period was the most challenging. With two of the critical systems restored, they now had to integrate the power and control networks while working around the increasing seismic activity. Jake found himself crawling through maintenance tunnels with Dr. Vasquez while the planet shook around them. Connection established, Elena reported. But, Jake, this whole system is held together with emergency patches and improvised solutions. It's not going to last long. How long? Days, maybe weeks. Long enough to prove it works, not long enough for actual mining operations. Then, we better hope days are enough. The moment of truth came as they prepared for the final system activation. Jake stood in the facility's control center, surrounded by displays that showed jury-rigged systems held together by human stubbornness and Zephyrian expertise. Engineer Therian was monitoring power levels while his team made final adjustments to the critical systems. All stations report ready, Commander Chen announced. Seismic sensors show relative stability for the next 23 minutes, Dr. Vasquez added. Jake looked around at his team, exhausted, radiation exposed, but determined. They had done something that 3 previous expert teams had declared impossible. They hadn't restored the Zirian Prime facility to its original specifications, but they had created a working system that could extract valuable materials from one of the most hostile environments in known space. Engineer Therian, are you ready to witness human persistence in action? The young Zephyrian's crystalline hair chimed with what Jake had learned was amusement. I've been witnessing it for the past 8 hours, Captain Morrison. I'm ready to see the results. Jake activated the main control sequence. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then, gradually, the mining array began to respond. Deep in the planet's crust, extraction equipment that had been dormant for 6 months slowly came back to life. Processing systems initialized, transportation networks activated, and the first load of rare crystalline compounds began its journey to the surface. We have successful extraction, Dr. Vasquez announced, her voice tight with exhaustion and triumph. Confirmed, Therian added. The facility is producing refined materials at approximately 47% of original capacity. Captain Morrison, you've actually done it. Jake slumped against the control console, feeling the weight of exhaustion and radiation exposure catching up with him. They had succeeded, but barely. The repairs they had made were temporary at best, and the environmental stresses of Zirian Prime would eventually defeat their improvised solutions. But they had proven the point. Sometimes the desperate solution was the one that worked. Time to go, Commander Chen announced. Seismic sensors are showing increasing instability, and our radiation exposure is approaching critical levels. As they evacuated the facility, Jake took one last look at their handiwork. The Zirian Prime mining station was functioning, pumping valuable resources from a world that should have been uninhabitable. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't safe, and it definitely wasn't a long-term solution. But it was working, and sometimes that was enough. During the ascent to orbit, Engineer Therian surprised Jake with a question that had nothing to do with technical specifications. Captain, why do humans attempt problems that others consider impossible? Jake thought about it as he watched Zirian Prime shrink in the viewport. Because sometimes impossible just means no one has been desperate enough to try the right approach yet. And you think desperation is a virtue. I think desperation is a tool. Like any tool, it can be dangerous if used incorrectly. But when used properly, it can accomplish things that no amount of careful planning can achieve. Therian was quiet for several minutes. I believe I understand now why Princess Lyralii finds your species so intriguing. You're not just offering technology or resources to the galaxy. You're offering a completely different way of thinking about problems. And you think that's valuable? I think it's necessary. The galaxy faces challenges that conventional wisdom cannot address. Perhaps it's time for unconventional wisdom. As the Persistence rejoined the Zephyrian fleet, Jake found himself looking forward to reporting their success to Princess Lyralii. They had proven that human persistence could achieve practical results, even in impossible circumstances. More importantly, they had demonstrated that the galaxy's newest members might have something unique to contribute to its oldest challenges. The return journey to the Star Weaver should have been a celebration, but Jake found himself increasingly nervous as they approached the Zephyrian flagship. They had succeeded at Zirian Prime, proven that human methods could achieve results where conventional approaches had failed, but now came the harder challenge, convincing the Galactic Trade Consortium that humanity deserved a place among the stars. Incoming transmission from Princess Lyralii, Commander Chen announced. She's requesting permission to board our ship for the debriefing. Jake raised an eyebrow. Protocol dictated that they should report to her aboard the Star Weaver, not the other way around. Permission granted. Prepare the main cargo bay for a formal reception. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself standing at attention as Princess Lyraliai's shuttle docked with a persistence. When the airlock cycled open, she emerged wearing robes that seemed to capture and reflect starlight, but her expression was unreadable. Behind her came Ambassador Thane and a small retinue of officials. "Captain Morrison," she said formally, "I understand congratulations are in order. Engineer Therian's preliminary report indicates that your mission was successful." "Yes, Your Highness. The Xerian Prime facility is operational and producing refined materials." "At what cost?" The question caught Jake off guard. "I'm not sure I understand." Ambassador Thane stepped forward, activating a holographic display. "Captain, the facility you repaired is held together by emergency patches, jury-rig connections, and improvised solutions that violate dozens of established safety protocols. By conventional engineering standards, it's a disaster waiting to happen." Jake felt his heart sink. He had expected criticism of their methods, but not outright condemnation. "The repairs we made were temporary solutions designed to prove that the facility could be made operational. We never claimed they were permanent fixes." "Exactly our point," Princess Lyraliai said, though her tone was not accusatory. "You approached an impossible problem with the assumption that permanence was less important than immediate results. This is either brilliant pragmatism or dangerous recklessness. Which do you think it is?" Jake asked carefully. Instead of answering directly, Princess Lyraliai turned to Engineer Therian. "Please share your observations with the captain." The young Zephyrian stepped forward, her crystalline hair chiming softly. "Captain Morrison, I've spent my entire career learning to solve problems through careful analysis, precise planning, and elegant implementation. In 3 days working with your team, I learned more about practical problem solving than in 3 years of formal education." Jake began to feel cautiously optimistic. "Your methods are unorthodox, often dangerous, and frequently violate established safety protocols," Therian continued. "They're also remarkably effective. More importantly, they represent a fundamental philosophical difference in how to approach challenges." Ambassador Thane looked skeptical. "Explain." "Zephyrian engineering seeks to understand and control all variables before implementing solutions. Human engineering seeks to adapt and respond to variables as they arise. Both approaches have merit, but they excel in different circumstances." Princess Lyraliai nodded. "Continue." "The Xerian Prime facility failed because it was designed to operate in a controlled environment that doesn't exist. Previous repair teams failed because they tried to create that controlled environment before attempting repairs. Captain Morrison's team succeeded because they designed repairs that could function in an uncontrolled environment." Jake found himself holding his breath as he realized where this conversation was leading. "The galaxy currently faces several challenges that resist conventional solutions," Princess Lyraliai observed. "The Void Plague, the hegemony expansion, the destabilization of trade routes. All of these are problems that exist in uncontrolled environments where elegant solutions have proven inadequate." Ambassador Thane looked thoughtful. "You're suggesting that human methods might be applicable to these larger challenges?" "I'm suggesting that human methods represent a valuable complement to existing approaches," the princess corrected. "Sometimes the desperate solution is the one that works." Jake recognized his own words being quoted back to him and felt a surge of gratitude toward Therian for her obvious support. "There is, however, a concern that must be addressed," Ambassador Thane continued. "The Galactic Trade Consortium values stability and predictability. Human methods, by their very nature, introduce uncertainty and risk. How do we reconcile these conflicting priorities?" Before Jake could answer, Dr. Vasquez spoke up. "Sir, if I may suggest that stability and predictability are luxuries that the galaxy may not be able to afford much longer." All eyes turned to the xenobiologist. Elena rarely spoke during formal proceedings, preferring to focus on technical matters, but when she did speak, she usually had something important to say. "The Void Plague has been spreading for 2 years," she continued. "Conventional medical science has had no success in treating or containing it. At current rates of expansion, it will reach core worlds within the next decade. That's not a problem that can wait for an elegant solution." "You believe human medical approaches might be more effective?" Princess Lyraliai asked. "I believe human medical approaches might be more willing to try unconventional treatments," Elena replied. We have a history of using treatments that work before we understand why they work. Sometimes that's the only option. Trade specialist Webb added. The same principle applies to the economic challenges facing the consortium. The hegemony's aggressive expansion has disrupted traditional trade routes and created market instabilities that don't respond to conventional economic theory. Sometimes you need someone willing to try improving approaches. Jake watched the Zephyrian officials exchange glances and realized that this conversation had moved beyond simple trade negotiations. They were discussing humanity's role in addressing the fundamental challenges facing galactic civilization. Captain Morrison, Princess Lorelei, said formally, the Zephyrian Empire is prepared to sponsor humanity's application for membership in the Galactic Trade Consortium, with certain conditions. Jake felt relief wash over him, quickly followed by apprehension. What conditions? First, that humanity agrees to participate in a joint task force to address the Void Plague crisis. Your medical teams will work alongside the galaxy's leading researchers, but with the freedom to pursue unconventional treatment approaches. Agreed, Jake said immediately. Second, that human engineering teams be made available to assist with infrastructure challenges on worlds where conventional solutions have proven inadequate. Also agreed. Third, and most importantly, that humanity commits to sharing your problem-solving methodologies with other species, while also learning from their approaches. The goal is not to replace conventional methods with human methods, but to integrate both approaches for maximum effectiveness. Jake hesitated. This third condition was more complex than it appeared. It essentially committed humanity to becoming teachers and students simultaneously, sharing their hard-won pragmatic approaches while adapting to the refined methodologies of advanced civilizations. I'll need to confirm this with Earth's diplomatic corps, Jake said carefully, but I believe this arrangement is exactly what humanity hoped to achieve. Princess Lorelei smiled, and Jake realized it was the first completely unguarded expression he had seen from her in a formal setting. Excellent. Then, I believe we have the foundation for a long and mutually beneficial relationship. As the formal proceedings concluded and the Zephyrian officials prepared to return to the Star Weaver, Princess Lorelei approached Jake privately. Jake, she said quietly, using his first name, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. Something not related to trade negotiations or diplomatic protocols. Jake felt his pulse quicken. Of course, the integration of humanity into galactic civilization will require ongoing coordination and cultural exchange. The Zephyrian Empire would like to establish a permanent human liaison position, based aboard our flagship, and traveling throughout our territory. That sounds reasonable. Do you have someone in mind for the position? Princess Lorelei met his eyes directly. Yes, you. Jake felt the universe shift slightly around him. Me? But I'm a ship captain, not a diplomat. You're exactly what we need. Someone who understands both human and galactic perspectives, who can bridge the gap between different approaches to problem solving. Someone who can speak honestly about humanity's capabilities without diplomatic pretense. And you think I can handle that kind of responsibility? I think you've already been handling it. The question is whether you're willing to accept it formally. Jake looked around at his crew, Chun, Vasquez, Webb, even Engineer Therian, who had become an integral part of their team. They had proven that humans could contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization, but that was just the beginning. True integration would require years of careful work, building relationships, and establishing trust. Will my crew be part of this assignment? If you wish. The position requires a full support staff, and your team has proven remarkably effective at cultural adaptation. Jake made his decision. Then yes, I accept. Princess Lorelei's smile was radiant. I was hoping you would say that. Can I ask why this position is so important to you personally? She was quiet for several moments, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than Jake had ever heard it. Because I believe the galaxy is changing in ways that will require new approaches to old problems. And I believe that having humans as partners rather than just allies will be crucial for navigating those changes successfully. And personally, she paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. Personally, I've come to value the human perspective on challenges and solutions. I've also come to value the company of a particular human who isn't afraid to speak honestly about difficult topics. Jake felt his breath catch. Lorelei, I know this complicates matters, she said quickly. Interspecies relationships are complex enough without adding diplomatic responsibilities. But I believe that the connection we've developed could be an asset rather than a liability, if we're careful about how we manage it. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that I find myself caring about you as more than just a diplomatic contact, she replied honestly. And I'm hoping that you might feel something similar. Jake realized that his answer to this question would affect not just his personal life, but potentially the entire relationship between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. The diplomatic implications were staggering, but the personal implications were even more important. I do, he said simply. I care about you too. I have since that first dinner when you were willing to look past my cultural blunders and see what I was actually trying to say. Then, we'll figure out the complications together, Lyralii said. Humans aren't the only species capable of adapting to challenging circumstances. As Jake prepared to transfer permanently to the Star Weaver, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few days. He had begun the mission as a starship captain, hoping to secure trade relations for his species. He was ending it as humanity's ambassador to galactic civilization and the unlikely partner of an alien princess who had become far more important to him than any diplomatic protocol should allow. Commander Chen approached as he packed his personal belongings. No regrets, Captain. Jake looked out the viewport at the Star Weaver, where Princess Lyralii was waiting for him to begin a new chapter of both his life and humanity's future among the stars. No regrets, Sarah. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones you never saw coming. And sometimes the most impossible relationships are the ones worth fighting for. Jake smiled. That too. As the Persistence prepared to dock with the Zephyrian flagship for the final time, Jake realized that he was about to embark on the greatest adventure of his life. Not just representing humanity to galactic civilization, but learning to love someone whose very existence challenged every assumption he had ever made about what was possible between different species. It was going to be complicated, challenging, and occasionally dangerous. In other words, it was going to be perfectly human. 6 months after the Zirian Prime mission, Jake stood in the observation lounge of the Star Weaver, watching the swirling chaos of the Nexus Nebula through the massive viewport. The region had once been considered completely impassable, but human cargo ships now navigated through it regularly, cutting shipping times throughout the sector by almost half. It had become a symbol of what humanity brought to galactic civilization, the willingness to find practical solutions to impossible problems. The Trade Consortium's quarterly meeting is in 3 days, Princess Lyralii said, approaching from behind with a data crystal in her hand. Your species' membership application will be formally voted on. Jake turned to face her, still marveling at how natural it felt to have her nearby. Over the past months, their professional relationship had deepened into something that transcended species boundaries, though they had been careful to maintain appropriate diplomatic protocols in public settings. Any concerns about the vote? Jake asked. None regarding human capabilities, Lyralii replied. Your teams have exceeded expectations on every assignment. The Void Plague treatment protocols developed by Dr. Vasquez have shown promising results on 3 worlds. The mining operations on Kepler 442c are now supplying materials to 7 different systems. Even the emergency repairs to the Andorian trade stations have held up better than anyone predicted. But some consortium members remain concerned about human unpredictability. They understand the value of your methods, but they're uncomfortable with the implications for long-term stability. Jake nodded. This had been an ongoing challenge throughout humanity's integration process. Galactic civilization prized predictability and elegant solutions, while humans excelled at chaotic improvisation and desperate innovation. Finding a balance between these approaches had required constant negotiation and compromise. What does Ambassador Thane recommend? That you make one final demonstration of human capabilities, something that addresses the consortium's concerns about long-term planning and stability. Before Jake could ask what kind of demonstration, Commander Chen's voice came over the ship's communication system. Captain Morrison, your presence is requested on the bridge. We have a priority communication from Earth. Jake and Lyralii made their way to the bridge, where a holographic display showed Admiral Rebecca Martinez, Earth's senior military commander and the architect of humanity's expansion into space. Jake, the Admiral said without preamble, we have a situation. The Hegemony fleet has bypassed our early warning systems and is moving toward the Sol system. Estimated arrival in 72 hours. Jake felt his blood turn cold. The hegemony was a militant empire that had been expanding aggressively through the Outer Rim territories, conquering worlds and enslaving populations with ruthless efficiency. Earth's defensive capabilities were formidable by human standards, but primitive compared to hegemony technology. Fleet strength, Jake asked. 47 capital ships, plus support vessels. Our intelligence suggests they're moving to establish Sol System as a staging ground for operations in this sector. Princess Lyralii stepped forward. Admiral Martinez, the Zephyrian Empire is prepared to provide military assistance. Our fleet can reach Earth within 60 hours. Appreciated, Your Highness, but this isn't a problem that can be solved with conventional military responses. Hegemony technology is superior to anything we can field, and their numerical advantage is overwhelming. Jake studied the tactical display showing hegemony fleet movements. The enemy was approaching through a corridor of space that avoided all major military installations, suggesting detailed intelligence about galactic defense networks. It was a brilliantly planned assault that minimized the risk of effective resistance. What's our current defensive posture? Jake asked. All available Earth Defense Force ships are moving to intercept, but we're looking at a force ratio of approximately 4 to 1 against us. Traditional tactics give us virtually no chance of success. Then, we don't use traditional tactics, Jake said immediately. Admiral Martinez smiled grimly. That's why I'm calling you instead of our conventional fleet commanders. I need the most unconventional tactical thinking humanity can provide. Jake looked around the bridge, where his integrated human Zephyrian crew was already analyzing the situation. Dr. Vasquez was reviewing hegemony technology databases, Commander Chun was calculating fleet movement patterns, and Engineer Therian was examining defensive options with Trade Specialist Webb. Give me 12 hours to develop alternatives, Jake said. And Admiral, start evacuating non-essential personnel from Earth's orbital facilities. If my plan doesn't work, we're going to need to minimize casualties. As the communication ended, Princess Lyralii placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. You have an idea. The beginning of one. The hegemony is planning a conventional assault using superior technology and overwhelming force. They expect us to respond with conventional defensive tactics. And you intend to disappoint them? Jake smiled, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with impossible challenges. I intend to give them the most unconventional defense they've ever encountered. The next 12 hours were a frenzy of planning and preparation. Jake's team worked with Zephyrian tactical analysts to develop what could charitably be called a strategy, though it violated every principle of conventional military doctrine. The plan is insane, Commander Chen announced after reviewing the preliminary outline. It relies on at least 17 different variables aligning perfectly, assumes that hegemony commanders will react exactly as we predict, and requires executing complex maneuvers in 3 different star systems simultaneously. Will it work? Jake asked. If everything goes perfectly? Maybe. If any single element fails, we all die horribly. Good enough. What do we need to make it happen? Dr. Vasquez had been running simulations on her workstation. We'll need cooperation from at least 40 human cargo ships, precise coordination with Zephyrian fleet elements, and the willingness to use several experimental technologies that haven't been properly tested. And we'll need to convince the hegemony that they're facing a conventional defense right up until the moment we spring the trap, Engineer Therian added. Jake looked around at his team, exhausted, stressed, but determined. They were about to attempt something that no military academy would teach, and no strategic computer would recommend. It was, in other words, a perfectly human solution to an impossible problem. Princess Lyralii, I need to ask something that goes beyond our diplomatic agreements, Jake said formally. What I'm proposing will put Zephyrian ships and personnel at significant risk. You have every right to refuse. Jake, she replied, dropping diplomatic protocol entirely. If the hegemony conquers Earth, humanity's integration into galactic civilization ends before it truly begins. More importantly, people I care about will be in danger. Whatever you need, you have it. Jake felt a surge of gratitude and affection that had nothing to do with diplomatic relations. Thank you. The battle plan that emerged from their collaboration was unlike anything in recorded military history. Instead of meeting the hegemony fleet in direct combat, they would use human cargo ships as mobile sensor platforms, Zephyrian technology to create false readings, and a series of coordinated maneuvers designed to make a small defensive fleet appear much larger than it actually was. The key is misdirection, Jake explained to the assembled fleet commanders via holographic conference. The hegemony expects us to defend Earth directly. Instead, we're going to convince them that our main fleet is positioned to defend the Proxima Centauri system while Earth appears lightly defended. Captain Sarah Rodriguez of the EDF cruiser Defiance looked skeptical. And when they discover the deception, by then, they'll be committed to an attack formation that leaves them vulnerable to the real trap. Human cargo ships equipped with Zephyrian sensor spoofing technology will simulate a major fleet engagement at Proxima Centauri. While the hegemony moves to intercept what they think is our main force, the real defense fleet will be positioned to attack their flanks using the asteroid field around Saturn as cover. That's a lot of moving parts, observed Commander Liu of the Beijing. It is, but it's also the last thing they'll expect from a supposedly primitive species. The execution began 36 hours later, as hegemony scouts entered the Outer Sol system. Jake watched from the Starweaver's bridge as human cargo ships began broadcasting false sensor signatures, creating the impression of a massive fleet movement toward Proxima Centauri. Hegemony scouts are responding as predicted, Engineer Therian reported. They're transmitting data about human fleet dispositions to their main force. Phase 2, Jake ordered. Across the system, Zephyrian ships began broadcasting additional false readings, creating the illusion of a running battle between human and hegemony forces near Proxima Centauri. The sensor ghosts were sophisticated enough to fool casual observation, but wouldn't stand up to close inspection. Hegemony main fleet is altering course, Commander Chen announced. They're moving to intercept our fleet at Proxima Centauri, just as predicted. Time to intercept: 47 hours at their current acceleration. Jake felt the familiar tension that came with plans that required perfect timing. If the hegemony discovered the deception too early, they could still reposition to attack Earth directly. If they discovered it too late, the human defensive fleet would be out of position to exploit their vulnerability. Phase 3, Jake ordered. The real Earth Defense Force fleet, along with Zephyrian reinforcements, began moving from their hidden positions in the outer system towards Saturn's orbital space. They would arrive just as the hegemony fleet committed to their attack on the false target at Proxima Centauri. Jake, Princess Lorelei said quietly, if this doesn't work, I want you to know that working with you these past months has been the most rewarding experience of my diplomatic career. And personally, I've come to love your impossible species almost as much as I've come to love one particular impossible human. Jake felt his breath catch. It was the first time either of them had used that word, despite months of growing emotional intimacy. I love you too, he said simply, which is why this plan is going to work. I refuse to let the universe be cruel enough to bring us together just to tear us apart. That's not very logical reasoning. No, but it's very human reasoning. The climax came 18 hours later, as the hegemony fleet approached what they believed was the site of a major battle at Proxima Centauri. Jake watched the tactical display with increasing tension as enemy ships moved into attack formation. Hegemony fleet is beginning active sensor sweeps of the Proxima system, Dr. Vasquez reported. They'll penetrate the sensor spoofing within minutes. Earth Defense Force is in position, Commander Chen added. All ships report ready for engagement. Zephyrian fleet elements are standing by, Engineer Therian confirmed. Jake waited until the hegemony fleet was fully committed to their attack approach before giving the final order. Execute. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. As the hegemony fleet discovered they had been chasing sensor ghosts, the real human Zephyrian force attacked from Saturn space, using the planet's rings as cover and the gas giant's gravity, to accelerate their approach. The hegemony commanders, expecting to fight primitive human ships in open space, found themselves under attack by a coordinated force using unconventional tactics in challenging terrain. Their superior technology was negated by superior positioning, and their numerical advantage was meaningless when they couldn't bring their full force to bear. Hegemony fleet is breaking formation, Commander Chun announced with barely contained excitement. They're attempting to reposition for a conventional engagement. Don't let them, Jake ordered. All ships maintain harassment attacks and keep them off balance. The battle continued for 6 hours, with human and Zephyrian ships using hit and run tactics to prevent the hegemony fleet from organizing an effective counterattack. It was exhausting, dangerous work that required split-second timing and perfect coordination. Hegemony flagship is signaling retreat, Dr. Vasquez announced in amazement. The entire fleet is withdrawing from Sol system space. Jake slumped in his command chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion and relief. They had done the impossible, defeated a technologically superior force using nothing but unconventional thinking and desperate courage. Damage report? He asked. Minimal casualties on our side, Commander Chen reported. 3 ships with moderate damage, no fatalities. Hegemony losses include 12 capital ships and approximately 30 support vessels. Princess Lyralii approached Jake's chair, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal relief. Captain Morrison, I believe you've just provided the consortium with the demonstration they requested. How so? You've shown that human methods can achieve strategic success, not just tactical innovation. More importantly, you've demonstrated that humans can be trusted with responsibilities that affect the security of galactic civilization. Jake looked around the bridge at his integrated crew, humans and Zephyrians working together with an efficiency that transcended species boundaries. They had saved Earth, proven humanity's value to the galaxy, and possibly prevented a major galactic war. So what happens now? He asked. Now we return to consortium space for your species' formal admission to galactic civilization, Princess Lyralii replied. And then we begin the real work of integration. And personally, she smiled, reaching out to touch his hand in a gesture that would have been scandalous 6 months earlier, but now seemed natural. Personally, we continue building something that has never existed before, a relationship that proves different species can find common ground even in impossible circumstances. Even when one of those species has a tendency to solve problems by doing everything the hard way. Especially then. The galaxy needs your impossible solutions, Jake. And I need the human who creates them. As the Starweaver began its journey back to consortium space, Jake reflected on how much had changed since that first awkward encounter with alien royalty. Humanity had found its place among the stars not through technological superiority or diplomatic elegance, but through the simple willingness to attempt what others considered impossible. And somewhere in the process, he had found something he had never thought to look for, love that transcended every boundary he had ever imagined. Hey, sweetheart, he said quietly to Princess Lyralii as they watched the stars wheel past the viewport. She blushed, her translucent skin taking on a deeper blue tint, and whispered, "Yes, my love." And they both laughed, knowing that what had begun as a cultural misunderstanding had become the foundation of something beautiful, impossible, and perfectly human in its stubborn refusal to accept that love had limitations. In the end, that was perhaps the most important thing humanity brought to galactic civilization. The belief that no challenge was too great, no problem too complex, and no dream too impossible for someone willing to try the desperate solution. Even when that solution involved falling in love with an alien princess and somehow making it work.